Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Welcome to Encounter, a show of the Broome County Council of Churches, where we talk about faith and family and community and current events and all sorts of wonderful topics. I'm Reverend Alicia Dixon-Gerrard, one of your hosts, and I'm so glad to have with me today Reverend Dr. David Russell Wickins, and we have a great conversation exploring men's health. But first, tell us more about you.
Well, I actually grew up near the Buffalo, New York area, in what I would simply sum up as the average semi-functional family that led me on a lifelong journey of health, healing, and wholeness, mind, body, and spirit.
Yes.
And so I would be part of Boy Scouts, be part of YMCA, be part of a number of other groups that would help me along that journey. Then eventually I would go from being an engineer in college to on that journey seeking out psychology and sociology and all those other things, and ended up getting a degree in psych and early childhood development.
Wow.
And as I would graduate, I worked at a place called Baker Hall, a juvenile home for youth. And I would quickly latch on to the idea of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, is one of those sayings out there. And by the time those kids got to the juvenile hall, they had a lot of damage that they needed to find healing from. I ended up working for the Boy Scouts that had done so much for me to try to help kids prevent going down that path. And eventually it led me to a calling of ministry that I've been doing for almost 30 years. I would get a master's degree in 2000. And on the continuing journey, I would end up getting a doctorate in counseling and pastoral care in 2019. So it's been a continuing journey, both personal and to help others to find that health, healing, and wholeness, mind, body, and spirit. So, and it's led me here today.
Yes, which I'm so glad. I forget how long we've known each other, at least maybe a couple of years now.
Probably at least 2 or 3.
At least 2 or 3. And we met like through a pastor's like little study group. And then I reached out and was like, hey, have lunch with me. Because, you know, I'm a little bit of an extrovert.
A little.
And Reverend Dr. David here, being introverted, was brave enough to say, yes, sure, why not? And we've become friends and not just colleagues, which I've enjoyed. And I love the semi-functional family language, because I think that's all of us, really.
Pretty much everybody.
Everybody, and you're definitely using both sides of the brains with the engineering and then the psych and pastoral care. I can't do that. That's not one of my superpowers.
We all have our gifts.
We all have our gifts. So I decided to choose Men's Health this month because of No Shave November. It's a local thing that is done in which it grows awareness about men's health. And on purpose, I don't know if this is national or just kind of what we do in the Tri-Cities, men don't shave for the whole month of November. They grow out the beard and other facial hair. And I kind of like it on my husband. I kind of sort of like it. To kind of raise awareness about men's health issues. So I decided this would be a great topic then to talk about in more detail. And neither one of us are medical doctors, but a lot of the information on men's health you can look up. You know, you can Google and go to acclaimed, satisfactory, good resources like the Center for Disease Control and things like that. So I love that health and wholeness and wellness journey you talked about, being on that language again. What would you say is your kind of definition of health, or a good general working definition of health?
Well, even when I worked for the YMCA a number of years ago, their theme was mind, body, and spirit. And a while ago, even through my schoolwork, when I looked into Isaiah talking about healing, it actually was that Jewish word shalom, which was health, healing, and wholeness in the complete terms.
Yes.
And that concept that mind, body, and spirit all firmly interact with each other, positive or negative.
Right.
And finding a way to find that wholeness that comes from all those things.
Yes. I like that, this integrated notion that sometimes we've gotten away from in the Western world. Our influence, our social cultural influences, kind of from the Enlightenment and things like that, if anybody remembers from social studies class. Very heavy on intellect, but not as much sometimes remembering our bodies and our spirits, and even when talking about intellect, noting that the mind isn't just kind of this information instrument, but we can include mental wellness as well in what we're talking about. So it's so important, I think, to note that, because I looked up some of the statistics. So the Office of Disease Prevention and Health, for example, says that men live 5 years less than women on average, and that they are at higher risk for many serious diseases, including heart disease and cancer. And the Center for Disease Control said that heart disease and cancer, 1 and 2 respectively, are the 2 leading causes of death for men in our country, and that's even including the COVID years. So when we think about statistically the hardcore evidence of what men are going through in life right now, I think is very relevant, and always relevant to kind of talk about men's health. And what do we think are some of these causes? We could just surmise, of course, of the lower life expectancy and these causes of diseases.
Well, I think both in what I've experienced and observed, I think stress can be a huge factor, and either dealing with it or ignoring it.
Yes.
And I became kind of locked onto the phrase, we can either get stuck in dwelling on something or denying it, versus trying to work through things.
Right.
And even in my own family, we had a joke that when we were asked how we were doing, no matter what the situation, we always said fine, without acknowledging. But we also joked around we would listen for the tone in each other's voice.
Yes.
Oh, I'm fine, or I'm fine, or I'm fine. You know, as that gauge of, you know, how we're really doing.
Yes.
Because it's often easy to try to go on autopilot and even not acknowledge ourselves some of those realities of dealing with it and pressing on. And I think in the male perspective, I came from a father who was the walk it off kind of guy. Tough it out, don't deal with it, just work through it. And even in high school when I walked off my fractured ankle,
oh, wow.
you know, there seems to be that mentality that you're supposed to be strong enough to just take whatever comes.
Yeah.
And that can lead to both short and long-term things when
Right.
you don't deal with things at the time.
Yeah.
Or even as they build. And
Right, right. Because stress has an impact on everything, not just kind of maybe our mind is distracted, but on our body and our spirit and soul too. It takes a toll on the body. So yes, heart disease is one of those leading causes across race, which was very interesting to me when I was trying to just look up some statistics. And half of men who die suddenly had no previous symptoms as well, is what CDC was alerting us to. So stress, definitely, and you alluded to this social cultural factor of some definitions maybe of manhood, of being tough and strong and not admitting pain or vulnerability or any sort of weakness, and that's kind of just the way it is.
admitting you're hurting can be a sign of weakness.
Right.
Which is harder often to admit to.
Yeah, yeah.
So pressing on.
Pressing on. And that's, of course, a whole nother episode. Maybe we'll talk about.
To be continued.
To be continued. You know, these social, cultural definitions of manhood that have changed over time, that there are definitely some very positive aspects to being strong, but one of those negative aspects, like you said, is kind of then the stress becomes internalized, it seems, that it takes a toll on the organs and on the spirit. And yeah, you can collapse without symptoms sometimes. Of course, we're not wishing that upon anybody, but it's kind of important then to learn how to maybe talk about those things. That tone of voice, that was an interesting inflection, can tell the truth instead of how one's really feeling. But was there space then to continue the conversation, then becomes the question.
Well, then creating that space, and there's a number of times I'll ask someone else because of my own journey, how are you doing? Mm-hmm. And if I ask twice, sometimes I'll get an honest answer, or do you really want to know? Mm. Or in our tradition of Methodism, the question is, how is it with your soul?
I love that question.
Which goes beyond how are you feeling and how is it just mentally, but deep down, how are we at peace? And that was a big part of my journey, actually not growing up in church. Mm-hmm. I would first latch on to the physical part, where for me, even in high school and college, I think in 7 years I missed one workout. Mm. But I didn't realize how much that exercising helped both my mind and my spirit.
Right.
To be able to release that stress and tension was vital, a part of that component of health in all those aspects of, you know, getting me through even high school and college was that exercising.
Yes.
Also kept the rest of me healthy.
Right, right. And that definitely is one healthy habit, like one good way of dealing with stress and life circumstances. Sometimes challenges arrive that we don't expect that can cause stress as well. And also that space of talking through it. The whole, like you said, if I ask twice, then maybe someone will say, do you really want to know? Because they know they're going to take up time to be transparent and honest about, I'm struggling a little bit with whatever it is, and it's taking a toll on me on the inside and maybe also on my body, unbeknownst to me. Yeah, yeah. I like that you follow up with that question. It's a good thing, in part because when we talk about health, we're talking about, you know, mind, body, spirit, and I looked up some facts about suicide, and if that's a trigger, 988 is the number for anyone listening who maybe have struggled with suicide ideation before. The rate of suicide is highest in middle-aged white men. And in 2021, men died by suicide 3.9 times more than women. So what do we do when we talk about men's health about that?
I think so much of it for me was both on the receiving end, feeling like I could be in a safe place, comfortable enough to share. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's been so important to offer that safe place for other people.
Right.
To say, you're safe here to share what's on your mind and heart. And even for my own journey, the semi-functional part of the journey for me was growing up with a dad who worked hard to be gone early and home late, and a mom who stayed home, was both deeply wrestled with alcoholism. That the truth is, until my mom passed in 16 and dad in 17, I would not say that in public out of respect for them.
Right.
So it's that hiding those struggles that we can have. But on my own journey, as I would explore faith, one of my early, especially spiritual and pastoral mentors was a man named Mark Parsons. And he led me through a process, and the scripture that I still have as my life verse is the fruit of the Spirit, as a measure for how is my spiritual health.
Right.
If I'm truly at peace and in harmony, I have a sense of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I think I got that right.
Yes.
But if I'm wrestling with being out of sync,
right,
then I can have bitterness, anger, hatred, jealousy, quarreling, strife.
Yes.
And all those things can creep in.
Right.
And if we're honest, how often are we in a perfect state of peace? But if we recognize when we're getting out of sync,
right,
to figure out how to recenter again. And so that's really been a core for me, how to recognize that and find a safe place with peers and mentors and prayer partners and other people to be able to be there for each other to work through those things we're going through.
Yes,
so.
Exactly. And particularly because, you know, Broome County Council of Churches, we're faith-based. I'm so glad you shared that. That's wonderful to give some concrete advice and even some scripture to go to with tending to our spiritual health. That's a very good measure. If you are supposed to have abundant life and the fruit is this joy and abundance and kindness and gentleness, but yet you're cranky and mean,
there's something out of sync.
Something might be out of sync that you need to address. Yes, yes. If you're just tuning in, you're watching Encounter, a show of the Broome County Council of Churches, and we're having a really great conversation on men's health for No Shave November, the awareness month about men's health. And this fact of that Hebrew word that people may or may not be familiar with, shalom, does mean wholeness. That word for peace is not necessarily the absence of conflict, but these indicators of peace that you were talking about, and wholeness and health and wellness, being able to experience gentleness in your spirit and gentleness towards others, joy and love and self-control. And self-control could be in the tongue, self-control can be in how we're eating, it can be in what we're exposing our minds to. Are we binge watching bad things, things with bad theology? It could be those multitude of things. So are we, Paul calls it the fruit of the flesh. What he's talking about are those things that harm our spirit. And because we're integrated, mind, body, spirit, and soul, it also is probably impacting our body too, if we're experiencing more of the fruits of the flesh versus the fruits of the spirit. So thank you for bringing that up as a kind of a measurement, because I think sometimes we don't necessarily know, how do I know if I'm healthy?
Right.
That's a good measurement.
Well, and having other people to be honest with us enough. That maybe my kids did it out of a little bit of teasing, but they could tell as kids if I was getting a little out of sync. And their joke was, Dad, did you do your devotions today? But that was, Dad, you're being a little cranky. You need to go recenter. But it was that honesty that sometimes family can bring that we don't always realize, because sometimes we can convince ourselves we're doing okay, or think we're, at least on the outward side, seeming okay when we're not.
Right.
And finding those people that can either know us well enough as much as ourselves, I think is important to us. Finding and maintaining that health in family or peers or colleagues or others that can walk alongside to let us know.
Right, exactly. Those safe spaces and safe people to talk with and maybe even work out with as a way of working out stress. And also what we've kind of been talking about is emotional, mental, psychosocial distress. If you're experiencing some form of distress or worry or anxiety, particularly if it's heightened, having a positive way to work through that so that we are decreasing as a country our numbers of deaths prematurely and suicides and that sort of thing, those sort of issues that we're taking care of, the men in our lives, and taking care of ourselves if we are male, which I think is so important. I think God would want that.
I would think so, yes, definitely.
And I think our families want that too. And so here's one you may not want to talk about, the topic of, I think sometimes as females, as women, we might feel like we're nagging the men in our lives when we're like, did you go to the doctor? How are you feeling? That toe is still bugging you? That bruise is not healing. But I remember talking with a male friend and he said, but it's not nagging, it's you trying to love the men in your life well. To say that I care enough that I don't want you to be in any sort of pain unnecessarily, whether it's internal or external. Any thoughts on the nagging?
Well, again, I think whether it goes to spouse or parents or kids or peers or colleagues, there was a group that had a concept of, they called it the 4 A's. And they said the 4 A's in a relationship are acceptance, affirmation, and accountability and authority. That if you're only trying to have authority in someone's life and you're not accepting or affirming them first, there's another one of those sayings, people don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Exactly.
But to be able to accept and affirm someone enough can often lead someone to be much more open to that accountability and authority. And it's that balance, whether it's spouses or others. If there's enough of the acceptance and affirmation, then even us men can be a little bit more willing to receive the accountability and authority. And yet it still sometimes takes patient persistence to get through.
Right.
And, that's that hard part for someone, is when to push too hard, when not to push hard enough, other than when you get cues either physically or verbally from someone else, when you're pushing too hard. And, but to still be persistent. And
to be persistent.
can be important.
For sure. Indiana University School of Medicine said 31% of men suffer depression in their lifetime, but only a quarter talk to a mental health professional, only a third take medication. So that persistence can pay off because sometimes it's an acknowledged issue that can be hard to seek help for, whether we're talking about depression, whether we're talking heart disease or cancer, exploring the vulnerability of mortality with those issues, whether we're talking some other sort of physical ailment. All those things can be difficult to face. And so statistically, men are much less likely to go to the doctor and talk about it, but yet we have this higher mortality rate. And so I think that's the motivation to be persistent as people who love the men in our lives, you know, wife, daughter, spouse, friend, clergy person, whoever that is, to be persistent when you notice something. Because the reality of the situation is telling us that 5 years shorter lifespan and higher rates of heart disease and cancer and suicide are clearly problematic. You know, we clearly don't want this for men in our lives. We clearly want to take care of them and them to live long and prosper, you know, as Star Trek would say.
Right.
So it's good to be persistent. So what encouragement would you give those who are maybe a little bit hesitant to talk about those pains they've been feeling in their chest, or the fractured ankle they're still trying to walk on, or those deep feelings of sadness that are not going away after 6 weeks or more, suicidal ideation besides 988 that people can call. 988 is a number. Someone's there to talk to you if you're struggling. But in addition to that.
Well, usually when you joke around, there's more than a grain of truth to it. And I can probably be that example. We've joked around, stay tuned, someday I'm going to do a TED Talk, don't do what dumb Dave did. That I spent a decade as a fitness instructor in the YMCA. I've got a degree in psychology. I've spent 30 years in spiritual development, have that doctoral degree in counseling, and yet I didn't always acknowledge myself when I was getting off track physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
Right.
That when I first started as a pastor, I was pastoring, doing school, doing part-time jobs, and literally after 3 years in ministry, my doctor said, if you don't slow down, you won't live to be 30.
Wow.
And that's where I learned, you know, I almost felt like I heard God say, you know, Dave, Sabbath is meant for you too.
Yes.
That God wired our bodies to rest. And even since I came here and talked about Sabbath, I heard the damage that can come. It's not an angry God punishing us, but a God creating our bodies to heal. When I was a fitness instructor, I was told there are only 2 muscle groups you can exercise every day. Ironically, your calves and your abdomen. Because those groups are dense enough to heal quickly enough.
Right.
When you exercise, you're actually breaking your muscles apart,
right,
and they need time to come back stronger. If you don't, they can continue to weaken. And I actually, when I was learning about Sabbath, there was some medical expert on the radio that said, if your bodies do not rest, they can break down on a cellular level.
Wow.
It's almost like your body literally starts collapsing because your body doesn't get the rest it needs.
Yes, wow.
You would have think I had learned that when I was 25. But busyness and ministry and family and other things, too often I would slip into those old habits of getting too busy, to not exercise, to not take time. And, you know, even now I'm 30, 40 pounds lighter than I was because I got to a place where I took care of everybody but me. And in order to deal with the stress of ministry, instead of going to the gym, I would go through the fast food drive-through.
Yes, right, right.
Because even physiologically, as ironic as it is, when your stomach is busy, your brain isn't working as much because your blood goes from your brain to your stomach.
To digest, right.
And so those are some of the realities of unhealthy ways. Long-term, we can deal with things. You know, there's a reality to comfort food.
Yes.
It comforts because, like a Thanksgiving meal, but to see the importance of that. And even in my schoolwork, my focus was helping pastors' kids to find spiritual health. And it all became a project on interviewing them. But what I found and my mentors taught me was simply allowing someone to tell their whole story where they can be listened to, heard, and not judged.
Right. Right.
allowed them to often tell parts of the story they had never told anyone before.
Wow.
And simply speaking it and releasing it was incredibly healing.
Yes.
And that's too often what people, and if you're going to get stereotypical, sometimes us men even have a harder time doing is sharing our feelings. But to even simply share that can be healing in itself.
Right.
Because it's not stuck in here. You're physically getting it out through telling it. And that's the value of that mind, body, and spirit, and mental and physical health.
Yeah.
Simply being able to release those things with somebody you can trust.
Right.
Can be so important to our overall health. It can help our stress level, it can help our body, it can help us to have that peace and help us to be centered. And I think those are vital things for us to find. An accountability partner, one that can both affirm and hold us accountable, mind, body, and spirit. I just started working out again, and I hit the pool because that's the one thing I can do, and every muscle in my body is reminding me. But I can almost feel my mind feeling that joy and that peace that comes from doing that, from releasing it. And I used to tell people in the fitness center, it's too important not to do. And then dumb Dave stopped doing it. And there have been those seasons where I get those nudges, either mind, body, or spirit. You need to get back to being healthy.
Yes.
And I think that's so important for us to learn from those things and to be available to other folks.
Exactly.
And, find those safe places and, whether it's Community of Grace or other places, to be able to find that safe place that can bring healing to each other. And I think that's ultimately what led me to my faith, was a God who not only wants us to find it, but to find a community that can help you to do that. And whatever your faith community is, I think that's what it can be.
Yes, right.
Hopefully what we can both give and share with each other.
Exactly, exactly. So what you said, I hear you saying that this is a great act of God's love and self-love and love for the ones in your life, to learn how to let go of stress, to discuss feelings of anxiety, sadness, even anger, and to process it, to work the body as an act of healing, and to also rest the mind, body, and soul. All those things, I hope the men listening here, are acts of self-love and God-given, as a way of God showing that he loves us as the humans we are, and where you love the people in your life, because hopefully you're expanding your life expectancy and you'll be around longer for them. So yeah, thank you for being so transparent in what you're sharing and what you have shared and continue to share, I say, because we meet on a regular basis, and I appreciate your accountability of occasionally asking me, what are you doing to take care of yourself? So menfolk, I hope you heard us. You've been listening to Encounter or watching Encounter. We're so glad you tuned in. We talked about men's health holistically this month, mind, body, spirit, and soul, with Reverend Dr. David Russell Wickins. I'm so glad he joined us. I hope you learned a lot and have been encouraged to take care of yourselves.